Hey everyone! Today we're going to dig into the hidden story behind a date you probably know pretty well, the long and pretty tough fight to create Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
So I want to start with a question for you. What does a song that you've definitely sung at a bunch of birthday parties?
The one with these surprisingly powerful lyrics, which, let's be honest, you've probably sung without ever really thinking about what they mean.
What does that song have to do with this man who is, without a doubt, one of the most important figures in American history?
Well, the connection is incredible. That song is Happy Birthday by the one and only Stevie Wonder. And it wasn't just some birthday jam, it was a full-on protest anthem. It was a key weapon in the battle to create the Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday.
So let's start right there, with the story of how a song helped fire up a movement. Because this holiday, it wasn't just handed over. No way. It was won, after a fight that lasted for years.
So right after Dr. King was assassinated in April 1968, the push for a national holiday in his honor started up. But the idea was far from a slam dunk. For over a decade, it was met with some really fierce political resistance. Get this, in 1979, the King Holiday Bill was actually defeated in Congress. And you know by how much? Just 5 votes. 5! It was a huge blow, and that razor-thin margin just goes to show how deeply divided the country still was about Dr. King's legacy.
So what was the holdup? Well, Professor James Honey puts it pretty bluntly. He says that many people in power didn't see Dr. King as this great unifier. They saw him as a troublemaker. And honoring him with a federal holiday? That meant facing a difficult history that a lot of people just weren't ready for.
But the fight was nowhere near over. This is where the whole story turns, all thanks to the incredible efforts of people like Dr. King's widow, Coretta Scott King, and artists like Stevie Wonder. They absolutely refused to let the dream of a holiday die.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you the sheer persistence it took. The campaign kicks off right after the assassination in '68. 11 years later, in '79, the bill goes down. But then, in 1980, Stevie Wonder drops Happy Birthday, and it completely re-energizes the whole movement. By 1981, he and Mrs. King are delivering a petition with over 6 million signatures to Congress. Finally, in '83, President Reagan signs it into law, and the first official MLK Day is observed in 1986. Think about that, an 18-year battle.
Okay, so that's the story of how the holiday was won. But to really understand why it matters so much, we've got to go back to a moment that really captures the heart of Dr. King's fight, a letter written from a jail cell.
So it's 1963, and Dr. King gets arrested during protests in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. And from his jail cell, he reads this statement from 8 white clergymen calling his nonviolent protests unwise and untimely. His response, which he famously started scribbling on the margins of a newspaper, became the Letter from Birmingham Jail.
In that letter, he pushes back against the idea that he's some outside agitator. He does it with this absolutely profound idea that we are all connected. What happens in Birmingham, he argues, affects people in Atlanta, in New York, everywhere. He called it an inescapable network of mutuality. We're all tied together.
And to those clergymen who told him to wait for a better time, he makes the pain of segregation personal, and he makes it immediate. He writes about trying to explain to his 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the amusement park, and seeing these depressing clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky. That's why waiting was never an option.
Now, this urgency he felt led him to one of his most powerful arguments, that we don't just have a right, but we have a moral obligation to stand up and challenge injustice head-on.
And here's where he makes this really crucial distinction. He says there are 2 types of laws. You've got just laws, which align with moral law and uplift people. But then you have unjust laws, like segregation, which are totally out of sync with moral law and degrade human beings. And he says, quoting St. Augustine, "An unjust law is no law at all." That right there is the moral foundation for breaking that law through civil disobedience.
And so when the holiday finally did get established, his widow, Coretta Scott King, was very clear about what we're meant to celebrate. It's not just the man, but the timeless values that he lived by: courage, truth, justice, compassion, dignity, humility, and maybe most important of all, service.
So, how do we honor these values today? Well, the final piece of this story is about how the holiday's meaning has really evolved, from just a day of remembrance into a real call to action.
Today, the holiday is often called a day of service. The whole idea behind it is that it should be a day on, not a day off.
It's about channeling Dr. King's life of action into a national movement of community volunteerism. You know, things like cleaning up parks or serving in shelters.
And you know what? Living the legacy also means passing it on. There's now this rich world of children's literature all about Dr. King's story, making sure that future generations really understand the history and the principles he fought for.
And these books explore his life from all kinds of angles. Some, like one from his sister Christine King Ferris, share these really personal memories of the boy before he became a world-changing icon. Others tell the story of his powerful partnerships, like the one he had with the incredible gospel singer Mahalia Jackson.
And then others take his complex philosophy and break it down into principles that young minds can really grab onto. His niece, Angela Ferris Watkins, actually wrote a book that outlines his 6 guiding beliefs, including the really challenging concepts like love your enemies, making his ideology something a new generation can learn from and actually try to live by.
You know, in the end, it's like Coretta Scott King wrote, "The day is about celebrating a legacy of hope and healing." It's a reminder of the progress we've made, and it's also a call to keep going, to continue the work that still needs to be done.
And this leaves us with a final, really powerful thought from Mrs. King. She believed the core of her husband's philosophy was a kind of divine, loving presence that binds all life. So the holiday's ultimate message, then, is really a challenge to all of us. Can we tap into that same powerful, unifying force of love to continue the work of overcoming injustice today?